Right now, today, there's a good chance nothing about your life looks like it's heading toward being rich in 10 years. The account might be tight, the raise might not have come yet. Wealth might feel like something that happens to other people. That's not evidence against it. It doesn't show up in your bank account first. It shows up in small signs years before the money catches up to them. There's a ledger that keeps score before your balance does. Call it the quiet ledger. It doesn't track dollars, it tracks decisions, habits, and small moments most people never think to count. And by the time the money actually shows up, that ledger has usually been full for years. Today, I want to walk you through 15 signs that you're already writing entries into that ledger, whether you've noticed it or not. 10 years from now, several of them will probably already be true. Some of these will feel obvious once I say them. A few might surprise you. Let's start with the first one. Sign 15. You care more about the engine than the paint job. Most people watch a wealthy life the way they watch a movie. They notice the car, the house, the vacation photos, the watch. Something in them registers it and moves on. You watch the same scene and ask a completely different question. What produced that? What business, what asset, what decision came years before the purchase ever happened? A friend sees somebody's paid off house and thinks, must be nice. You see the same house and start wondering what they actually own that pays for it. Not because you're jealous, it's the mechanism pulling at you, not just the result. Here is why this matters more than it sounds like it should. Anyone can admire an outcome. Almost nobody bothers tracing it backward to find the decision that created it. Psychologists call this intrinsic motivation, wanting to understand something for its own sake rather than just for the reward it produces. The people who eventually build real wealth are almost always the ones who spent years quietly studying the engine, while everyone else was busy admiring the paint. You'll spend real time digging into how someone's business is actually structured. Things like the ownership stake, the licensing deal, the equity split, long after everyone else has already scrolled past the headline. If you've ever caught yourself wondering how, instead of just wishing you had what someone else has, that curiosity has already started doing work for you, long before it shows up anywhere on paper. But curiosity about other people's money only counts for something if you're also willing to look honestly at your own. Sign 14. You would rather know the real number than feel good for 5 minutes. Most people don't actually know their real financial picture. They guess instead. And the guessing always leans the comfortable way. They think there's more in the bank account than there actually is, or that they owe less than they actually do. Not because they're careless, but because looking at the real ugly number feels worse in the moment than not looking at all. So the guessing becomes a habit of its own. You do the opposite, even when it's uncomfortable. You open the account on the weeks you don't want to. You check the actual number, not the one you're hoping for, not the one that would be easier to sit with for one more day. You'll pull up your banking app while standing in a store aisle before deciding whether to put something extra in the cart. Not because you enjoy the habit, but because guessing has burned you before. This costs you something small nearly every time you do it. A flinch, a moment of discomfort before your brain catches up to reality. But it buys you something far larger than that discomfort costs you. The people who face their real numbers consistently are the only ones who ever actually change them. You can't fix a number you've trained yourself not to look at. The truth is always cheaper than the version of it you've been avoiding. This pattern actually has a name. Researchers call it the ostrich effect, the tendency to avoid checking on something specifically because it might be bad news. People who don't regularly check their accounts show far more volatile spending, especially right after payday, than people who check consistently. The avoidance doesn't protect you from the number. It just protects you from finding out sooner. Here's where it gets expensive. Sign 13. Debt doesn't go quiet in your head, even when the people around you have made peace with it. Look around, and carrying a balance looks completely normal. Car payments, credit cards, financing plans on furniture nobody could actually afford outright. And these days, an actual payment plan for a Chipotle bowl ordered through DoorDash. 4 installments for lunch. Most people stop noticing the weight of it after a while. It just becomes part of the background of an ordinary life. For you, it never fully goes quiet. Even a small balance sits there, nagging, refusing to blend into the scenery the way it does for everyone else around you. That nagging feeling isn't irrational. Psychologists call it cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of holding two conflicting things at once. In this case, seeing yourself as financially responsible while also owing money. That discomfort is doing its job. The real numbers back it up. The average American carrying a credit card balance owes around $6,700, and just under half of all cardholders carry a balance like that from month to month, per recent Federal Reserve data. Paid off at a typical minimum payment, that balance takes about 10 years to clear and costs more than $9,000 in interest alone, nearly double the original amount. That small balance is also why you think twice before financing a couch you could technically afford in easy monthly payments. The payment fits. The debt still bothers you anyway. The people who never fully normalize owing money, the ones it always bothers no matter how small the amount, are almost always the ones who eliminate it and never go back to it. Noticing debt is the easy half. Building something in its place is the half most people skip. Sign 12. You already practice wealth, even in an amount that embarrasses you. $50 a month feels like nothing. It feels almost pointless to automate something that small. But that $50 invested consistently starting at 25 years old grows into more than $316,000 once you turn 65, assuming a normal long-term average return. If you wait 10 years to start that same habit, it only grows to around $113,000 by that same age. The 10 years you waited didn't cost you $50 a month. It cost you close to $200,000. For most people, this shows up as a small automatic transfer set up years ago and mostly forgotten about since, not some dramatic investing strategy anyone would notice. The amount was never the actual point. The behavior was the point. Behavior compounds the exact same way money does. There's a name for part of why this works too. Psychologists call it the consistency principle. Once you start behaving a certain way, you become motivated to keep behaving that way. Someone who saves $50 a month on a low income is far more likely to save $500 a month once their income grows, because the habit is already installed and running. Someone who saves nothing now usually keeps saving nothing later, just with a more convincing excuse attached to it. If you're already doing this, even in an amount that feels embarrassing to say out loud, you're further ahead than the number by itself suggests. But consistency without a target eventually drifts. It needs somewhere specific to go. Sign 11. Your money has an actual destination, not just a direction. Wanting to be financially fine someday is the default goal for almost everybody. That desire has no edges to it. It can't be measured, and it's easy to quietly abandon because it was never specific enough to notice when it slips away. You're different. You have an actual number attached to an actual date. $8,000 by next spring. Enough saved for a down payment by a certain birthday. A number written down somewhere, even if it's just in your notes app where nobody else will ever see it. Studies on savings behavior keep landing on the same conclusion. When a goal is attached to an exact figure and a real deadline, people put away noticeably more than when the goal stays undefined and open-ended. This traces back to what psychologists call goal-setting theory, a well-tested finding that specific, measurable goals consistently outperform vague ones like doing your best. A named number gives your brain a finish line to run toward. An open-ended hope gives it nothing to aim at, so the effort quietly leaks out somewhere else. You check that number every few months, not obsessively, just consistently enough to know whether you're actually on pace or quietly falling behind. It's one of the cheapest upgrades available in personal finance, and you already have it running. Having somewhere for your money to go is one thing. Being willing to protect that destination is another. Sign 10. You're learning to disappoint the present version of your life to protect the future one. Everyone gets invited to spend money they probably should not spend. A trip, a night out, an upgrade that everyone else in the group is already doing. Most people say yes, not because they can't do the math, but because saying no feels like missing out, or worse, feels like judgment from people they care about. You're learning to turn the invitation down anyway. Not everything and not out of stinginess, but when saying yes costs enough to matter later. Your friends plan a long weekend that will cost you $700 you don't have sitting idle. You skip it, not because you can't scrape the money together, but because you already know what that same $700 could quietly become in 10 years if it never left your account. I'm not saying you should turn into someone who never enjoys their money. I'm not saying every invitation deserves a no. The issue was never really the trip, the dinner, or the upgrade. The issue is whether you can tolerate being the only person in the room who said no, because some part of you already knows something about your future that the rest of the room hasn't thought about yet. That tolerance is rare. It's also trainable, and you're already training it one uncomfortable no at a time. Behavioral economists call the opposite tendency present bias. It means valuing an immediate reward far more than a bigger one later, even when the math clearly favors waiting. Protecting your future takes on a different weight once that future stops feeling like a stranger. Sign 9. The version of you 3 decades from now already gets a vote. The average person treats their future self like someone they barely know, someone they'll deal with later, once things calm down, once the timing finally feels right. Because that future person feels abstract and far away, it becomes very easy to spend money that person is actually going to need. You don't do this the same way. When you make a decision, even a small one, some part of you is already thinking about the person who has to live with the result years from now. You can picture that 60-year-old version of yourself clearly enough to know whether they would thank you for this purchase or quietly resent you for it. There's real research behind why this matters more than it sounds like it should. Studies on what researchers call future self continuity have found that people who feel genuinely connected to their future self accumulate significantly more savings and assets than people who feel disconnected from that future person. And this holds true even after accounting for age and income. The people who treat that future version of themselves as someone who genuinely exists end up protecting them automatically without needing fresh willpower every time. If your future self already has a voice in your head, that voice is one of the more valuable things you currently own. None of that protection means much without better information feeding it. Sign 8. You keep upgrading the operating system running your finances. The average financial education happens exactly once, usually by accident, usually from watching your family while growing up, and then it stops completely. Maybe it was the idea that a regular savings account is where your money grows, back when those accounts could pay 10% or more. Maybe it was the assumption that a steady job comes with a pension for life, when only about 1 in 7 private sector workers still has access to one today. The same assumptions get carried for the rest of a lifetime, whether they were ever accurate or not. You keep adding to it instead. A podcast on the drive to work, a video that actually explains something instead of just trying to sell you a course, a conversation that pushes your thinking slightly past where it was sitting yesterday. Maybe it's finally understanding what an index fund actually does, or learning why your credit utilization matters more than the headline number on your credit score. None of this feels dramatic day to day. It doesn't require a finance degree either, just staying a student of your own money. But financial understanding compounds exactly the way money does. Small deposits of better information made consistently produce someone who makes noticeably better decisions 5 years from now than the version who stopped learning. You aren't trying to become an expert overnight. You're simply refusing to stay exactly as uninformed as you started. Psychologists call this a growth mindset, the belief that your abilities and knowledge can actually be developed, applied here to money instead of talent or intelligence. Better information eventually turns into something the market is willing to pay for. Sign 7. You're quietly making yourself harder to underpay. The average person earns somewhere around $2 million across an entire working life. That number sounds huge and abstract until you realize what a small increase in your earning power actually does to it. Raise your value by even 3% through a skill, a certification, a track record, anything that makes you harder to replace. And that one upgrade alone could add roughly $60,000 to what you earn over your working life. and that is only one upgrade. Keep increasing your value throughout your career, and those small gains can compound into hundreds of thousands of dollars or even more than $1 million in additional lifetime earnings. Maybe it's a certification that took months of early Saturday mornings. Maybe it's finally learning the one piece of software your entire industry quietly expects you to already know. Most people treat learning a new skill as a cost, something they will get around to eventually, once they have more time or more spare money. You treat it as the opposite of a cost. Every course, every certification, every hour spent getting better at something valuable is you quietly buying yourself out of being underpaid later. Nobody can take back a skill once you've actually built it. Economists have a term for this: human capital, the idea that your skills and knowledge function as an actual appreciating asset. That makes it one of the very few investments that can never be repossessed from you. None of that value matters if you never actually ask for it out loud. Sign 6. You've stopped letting silence set your price. Most people accept the first number they are offered, not because it's fair, but because asking for more feels confrontational and staying quiet feels like the safer option in the moment. You've started asking anyway, for a raise, for better terms, for clarity on what a deal actually pays before you agree to anything. Maybe it's finally asking a client for your actual rate instead of the discounted one you gave them out of nerves. Maybe it's asking your manager why the last 2 raises came in below what the job posting for your own role is currently advertising. Research out of Carnegie Mellon found that people who negotiate their starting salary increase their pay by an average of a little over 7%. Part of why the very first number matters so much comes down to anchoring bias, the tendency for whatever number gets said first to shape everything that follows. Picture 2 people starting the exact same job, both offered $38,000 a year. One accepts it, the other asks for that same 7% more and gets it. With ordinary 3% raises over a 35-year career, that one uncomfortable conversation is worth roughly $170,000 by the end. I'm not saying every negotiation goes well, and I'm not saying you should fight over everything that crosses your desk. The issue was never the conversation itself. The issue is what staying silent quietly costs you year after year without you ever seeing the actual bill for it. Asking for what you're worth only builds something lasting once you start turning that income into ownership instead of just a bigger paycheck. Sign 5. You're learning the difference between earning money and owning it. Someone driving for a delivery app earns money for every hour they're behind the wheel. The moment they stop driving, the income stops with them. Someone who owns even a small stake in the company running the app earns money whether they work that day or not, because the asset is doing the work now, not their hours. That's the entire difference. Earning trades your time directly for money. Ownership trades a decision once for money that keeps arriving without your time attached to it. An extra $100 every month doesn't have to become a nicer dinner out. Redirect it into an asset instead. At a normal long-term average return over 20 years, it becomes more than $75,000 that didn't exist before. Economists call the instinct to treat that money differently. Mental accounting, sorting dollars into separate buckets in your head, spending money and ownership money, even though it's all the exact same dollars. High income makes life more comfortable. Ownership is what eventually makes it optional, whether you keep working at all. That isn't a small distinction. It's exactly the kind of entry the quiet ledger keeps score of. Sign 4. You're building proof before you feel ready, not after. Waiting for the moment you finally have enough money, enough confidence, enough certainty is the default plan for almost everybody. It's the reason so many people keep delaying the idea they've been sitting on. That moment rarely arrives exactly on schedule, so the waiting quietly turns into something permanent. You don't wait for that moment. You start with whatever is currently available to you, a small amount, an imperfect version, a first attempt that honestly embarrasses you a little. Maybe it's opening a brokerage account with $20 because $20 is what you actually have this week, not the 1,000 you keep telling yourself you'll start with someday. Not because you're reckless, but because you understand something most people miss entirely. Nobody gets to skip the beginner stage. The only real choice is whether you go through it now, while the stakes are still small, or later, once they no longer are. The world doesn't reward the plan sitting in your head. It only responds to the evidence you actually produce. Psychologists call this building self-efficacy, the belief that you're capable of succeeding at something. That belief gets built by small proof, not a good plan. Every small, imperfect action you take right now is evidence your future is quietly depending on. Sometimes that evidence arrives in the form of one number that refuses to leave you alone. Sign 3, a single number changed you and never let go. At some point, most people who eventually build wealth remember a specific calculation that landed differently than they expected it to. Maybe it was adding up a small daily habit and being genuinely shocked by the total. A $35 a week delivery habit doesn't sound dangerous on its own. Add it up and it's over $1,800 a year. 10 years of that same habit is over $18,000 before you even count what that money could have earned if it had been invested instead of delivered to your door. Maybe instead it was doing that same kind of math on a subscription you had genuinely forgotten you were still paying for. The number itself was never really the point. What matters is that you let it change something. This connects to what psychologists call the availability heuristic. A specific, vivid number sticks in your mind and shapes your decisions far more than an abstract statistic ever does. Most people have a moment exactly like this and go right back to their old habits within a week because awareness without action fades fast. If a number has ever landed on you and actually stuck, changing even one small behavior permanently, that isn't a coincidence. That's one of the more telling signs on this entire list. Even the people who get this right eventually run into something they didn't plan. Sign 2. A setback slows you down. It doesn't erase who you are financially. Everyone gets hit with something eventually. A repair bill that should not have happened this month, a medical cost nobody scheduled in advance, a bad investment that loses real money instead of growing it, an emergency that drains the account you'd only just started to build. The setback itself isn't optional. Nobody gets to skip that part. What actually separates people is what happens in the weeks right after. Research on financial resilience keeps finding that people who rebuild their habits after a setback end up in a meaningfully stronger financial position over time than people who experience that same setback and simply never restart. You're the person who rebuilds. An $800 repair bill sets you back exactly as far as it would set anyone else back. The difference shows up 2 months later when your account is already climbing again while someone else's account, hit by the exact same size setback, is still sitting untouched at 0. The setback was never actually the test. The restart was. Nobody grades the emergency. Everybody grades what happens right after it. Psychologists call the belief behind that restart an internal locus of control, the belief that your actions actually influence your outcomes instead of assuming things just happen to you. People with more of it recover from setbacks faster. And underneath every single sign on this list, there's one belief holding all of them together. Sign 1, you no longer believe your current bank balance is who you are. This is the sign underneath every other sign I have named today, because without it, nothing else survives contact with a hard month. The savings habit quietly stops. The specific goal gets abandoned. The willingness to ask for more slowly disappears because somewhere underneath it all, a person starts believing this is simply their life now, permanently. You haven't let that belief take hold of you. Even in the months when the number is discouraging, even when it feels like you're further behind than everyone around you, some part of you refuses to accept the current number as a permanent verdict on who you are. Psychologists call this holding on to a possible self, an imagined future version of you that feels real enough to actually shape what you do today instead of just a wish in the back of your mind. That refusal isn't naive optimism, and it isn't a refusal to admit when a month genuinely hurts. It's the exact belief that keeps a person doing the small, unglamorous, invisible things for long enough for those things to actually compound into something real. Let's go back to right now, today, the moment that doesn't look like it's heading anywhere in particular. By now, you can probably guess what actually decides whether you're rich in 10 years. It was never the income, and it was not luck, and it was not some hidden financial secret that only rich people get taught. It was the quiet ledger. 15 small entries made or not made long before your bank account has any idea what's coming. Somebody who ends up building real wealth in 10 years is adding to that ledger right now without ever calling it that, checking the number instead of avoiding it, naming a goal instead of hoping for one, asking instead of staying quiet, restarting instead of quitting. None of it looks impressive from the outside. It just keeps compounding quietly for years until the outcome looks completely inevitable in hindsight. Somebody else looking at the exact same kind of numbers today isn't lazy and isn't making any obviously bad decisions either. They simply aren't writing anything into the ledger yet. Nobody hands either version of you a warning about which habits will matter 10 years from now. The only difference is which one starts today. You've just heard 15 entries. If several of them already describe you, the money hasn't caught up to you yet. That isn't a failure. That's only a timeline. The ledger does not lie and it does not rush. It just keeps score quietly until the number on the outside finally matches the one that has been true on the inside all along.